The War of the Gods was in the past. Now Lin Fang could finally be at peace with his wife and daughter. Everything seemed fine until Lin discovered they were being bullied. He felt useless, unable to do anything, as he was trapped in a deep sleep in his wheelchair. The story begins with a little girl on a swing. This child is Rui, the daughter of our main character, Lin Fang. She told her father that her teacher had asked why he never attended school meetings. Rui had warned the teacher that her father was an ancient god of war, but due to his injuries, he was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. Because of this, his daughter was often bullied. His wife also endured teasing, and Rui had to watch her mother cry secretly at night. The little girl desperately wanted Lin to regain consciousness. Lin saw his daughter's tears as she looked at him hopefully. Suddenly, a boy her age appeared, shouting that she was crying again. Rui didn't intend to back down, but the bully, Xiao, looked at her with contempt. He spat out disgusting and untrue rumors that her mother was taking advantage of a crippled man. The words enraged Rui, and she immediately jumped off the swing to confront him. Furious, she yelled at the aggressor that if he dared to insult her parents again, he would pay for it. In response, the bully pushed her to the ground. Xiao was bigger than Rui, so the push was quite strong. A swing was still behind her, and the girl hit her head. The bully rejoiced in her pain and even spat on the little girl. Rui felt helpless, clutching the grass in her hands angrily while Xiao called her an animal. In the end, the girl couldn't stand the insults any longer and attacked the boy, biting his hand. The bully's parents were nearby. When the boy's mother saw her son being attacked, she rushed to intervene. The woman kicked Rui and shouted that the girl was an uneducated brute. Rui found herself on the ground again, but now she looked angrily at the woman, who was behaving worse than her son. The woman picked the girl up by her clothes, ignoring her screams, and carried her toward Xiao. After letting go of Rui, she screamed for the girl to kneel and apologize immediately. Our protagonist sat in his wheelchair, his internal energy beginning to boil from the injustice his daughter was suffering. Anger and the desire to protect filled him as he looked at Rui. The daughter didn't understand why she should apologize to the boy who had started it all. At that moment, Xiao's father intervened. The man grabbed the girl by the ponytail and pulled hard, ordering her to apologize to his son. Rui continued to resist the two adults and received a slap from the woman. Xiao's mother looked at the girl as if she were trash and asked if she was sure of her defiance. The protagonist's daughter knew well that her opponents were far superior, but she stubbornly refused to bow to them. Suddenly, Xiao's father raised his hand to strike Rui, shouting that he would teach her a lesson. But to the great surprise of everyone, the protagonist's hand shot out and stopped the man. Lin gripped the man's wrist and asked him how he dared to touch his daughter. On that day, our hero finally regained his powers and declared that from now on, anyone who touched his daughter would be executed. Initially, Xiao's father felt superior, but now his life was hanging by a thread. From that day on, Lin had no intention of allowing anyone to humiliate his family. He pinned the man to the ground, while Xiao and his mother watched helplessly. The woman was very worried about her husband and tried to figure out how to help. She ran to Lin and began beating him, screaming at him not to touch her husband. The woman even threatened to call the police. Lin did not allow her to finish. She was thrown back by the force of his slap. She fell onto the grass, and Lin reminded her that she had hit his daughter. The hero was filled with rage and ordered them to remember this day, for he was sparing their lives despite them having messed with his child. Lin began to remember his battles. He had fought alone against a large number of soldiers. The lone warrior was breathing heavily, his whole body covered in wounds. The protagonist unexpectedly heard someone say that he could single-handedly motivate an army of 10,000. Lin quickly turned his gaze toward the voice and saw more warriors landing in front of him. They declared they wouldn't let him win so easily. One of the soldiers looked at Lin and admitted that he was truly worthy of his title, but today he was destined to fall at the hands of the 7 sons of the Western Alliance. Such a confident statement from his opponents made Lin smile slightly. He raised his spear and shouted that he had been fighting for 6 years and saw no reason to be afraid of them. The leader of the Western Alliance rushed to attack. The warriors, wielding different types of weapons, jumped at him, giving him no chance to survive. Lin dodged the blade, but the handle of a spear struck his body. The protagonist was still able to throw one of the members of the Western Alliance with his spear. The leader, weapon in hand, was now behind the protagonist, sure that he would deal a fatal blow. Lin had to act with lightning speed to repel the attack. His spear pierced the enemy's body. The leader began to cough up blood, unable to believe what had happened. Lin explained to the enemy that he was too weak. Even with an army of 10,000, he couldn't be pushed back a meter. At that moment, the 3 remaining members of the alliance were only a meter away. Lin immediately made several cuts and told the warriors to blame themselves for their loss. His spear movements were so fast and confident that the warriors didn't even have time to react. Only at the last moment did they understand that their end had come. The protagonist once again stood alone on the battlefield, believing that if he brought order to the country, then everything would be calm at home. After the battle ended, he realized he was gravely injured. Lin's eyes were closing, but he knew he could not give up because his daughter still needed a bone marrow transplant. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by Rui's voice, calling out to him as she clung to his legs. The man was overjoyed to see his daughter. He held Rui in his arms, and the girl couldn't believe it was really her father. The protagonist promised to eliminate Xiao's entire family if they did not kowtow 100 times. The family quickly bowed, apologizing with each bow. Rui cried loudly, saying that everyone hated her father, but the protagonist promised he would no longer allow anyone to harm his family. Rui continued to cry, complaining that no one believed her when she said Lin was a hero. The man heard his daughter, but was distracted when he realized his body had not fully recovered. Lin was upset, knowing he needed to awaken fully to protect his family. The girl immediately noticed her father's difficulty and asked him to put her down. Lin obeyed and carefully placed her on the ground. The hero tried to convince her that he was fine, stroking her head and telling her it was time to go home. At that moment, Rui told him that her grandmother had kicked them out of the house and forbidden them to return because her mother had to talk to her uncle's son. The protagonist frowned, realizing there was some kind of catch. Rui leaned over and whispered for him to pretend to be asleep again. Lin smiled at his daughter, saying it was a good idea. He then settled back into the wheelchair to carry out his plan. Rui immediately started screaming that her father had relapsed because Xiao's family had assaulted him. She turned to the frightened couple and said she was going to find her uncle, and then it would be their end. The girl began to push her father towards the house, and Xiao's parents believed they were about to be blackmailed for compensation. After some time, the protagonist and his daughter arrived at the main entrance of the house. A blonde woman stood in the hallway, very unhappy to see them. She immediately left, insulting Rui and reminding the little girl that she wasn't allowed to bring Lin back. Rui hid behind the wheelchair and bravely admitted to her grandmother that she and her father were very tired. The woman angrily ordered her to shut up, then pointed to Lin and yelled at Rui not to dare call him father. The girl continued to insist that she would. Suddenly, Rui heard a strange male voice say it would be an honor for him to spend his life with Xin. After that, a tall man left the house. The protagonist became gloomy when his daughter whispered that this was the man from her uncle's family that her mother had been talking to. The protagonist's wife was named Xin. She was a young, beautiful girl who seemed upset. She said she needed to consider the marriage proposal. The man, Sun, allowed her to think, confident he would make a good impression. Sun turned and saw Rui and Lin standing in the yard. He realized it was Xin's daughter, so he went over to the girl and started patting her cheeks, commenting on how cute she was. At that moment, Xin's mother told her to accompany Sun to the door, but Xin refused. Her mother ran after the man to find out how the meeting went, leaving her daughter upset. Rui, after observing the situation, whispered to her father that this man wanted to steal Xin from them. Her mother came over, and with all care and tenderness, she took her little hands. Xin thanked Rui for taking care of her father. The little girl started to cry and asked her mother if she was really looking for a new father. Xin promised that this would not happen while wiping her daughter's tears. She then noticed a mark on Rui's face and asked if her daughter had been in a fight again. The girl didn't want to bother her mother, so she lied and said that she had fallen. After that, Xin took the protagonist and her daughter home. After returning to the house, Rui was sent to her room, and her parents were left alone. Xin sat on the bed in front of Lin and tried to figure out what to do. The protagonist wondered if his wife knew he had woken up. At that moment, his wife said, "I know you can't hear me and aren't conscious, but I wanted to tell you something." These words made Lin worry even more. He had to make an effort not to give himself away. Xin gently stroked her husband's hair and said with tears in her eyes that while he had saved Rui by sacrificing himself, she wanted their daughter to have a strong and happy family. At this moment, Xin revealed that she was ready to marry Sun if he treated their daughter well. It wasn't easy for Xin to make this decision, but now that she had told her husband, she felt she had remained honest with the person she loved most. Then she stood up and sincerely apologized to the protagonist, who continued to sit silently in the chair. Signs started to leave. Meanwhile, Lin thought that his wife had been through so much while he was in a deep sleep. Suddenly, a loud knock was heard. He realized he wasn't alone. Xin's younger sister, Zhang, came out of the bathroom and said that Lin had no idea his wife was getting married. The protagonist didn't expect to see his sister-in-law, and although he didn't react externally, he was tense inside. Zhang approached the protagonist's wheelchair, tossed a wet towel aside, grabbed Lin by the chin, and lamented what a waste it was that such a handsome man was unusable. Soon, a melody from her phone began to play, distracting Zhang. She lay on the bed and answered the call, greeting her future brother-in-law. Zhang, still naked, propped her feet up near Lin's body, but the protagonist diverted his attention to listen to the conversation. Sun asked Zhang if her sister had accepted the gifts, but the girl replied no. However, she added that her sister would sooner or later be his. It seems Sun didn't believe her, so he invited Zhang to buy whatever she wanted. That was all the girl wanted to hear, and she immediately demanded a bag and a pair of shoes. Sun promised to give her everything she wanted if she did something for him. Zhang agreed and went to her sister's closet, promising to do anything Sun said. She dressed in a blouse and asked her future brother-in-law to replace Xin's wardrobe when they got married. After that, the girl left, and Lin was left alone. The protagonist considered what he had heard. It was difficult for him to accept that Shin needed to marry this man to give Rui a future. At that moment, Lin's bedroom window was open, and a light wind blew the curtains. Suddenly, a girl appeared in front of the wheelchair. She bowed to the protagonist and said she was happy that he had finally woken up. Lin recognized the girl as Ching and asked if she shouldn't be guarding the border. The girl, without raising her eyes, admitted that the master was now more important than the border, especially since after their last battle, no one dared to breach it. Lin listened carefully and asked if there was any more news. Ching looked sad and said that during these 2 years, he was surrounded by ill-intentioned people, especially those who wanted to take his wife. She added that without an order, she could do nothing, so now she asked for permission to eliminate all the villains. Lin heard her and could barely contain his anger. He realized that while he was recovering, some people had already managed to get closer. However, he was more worried about Sun now, so the protagonist asked Ching to bring him all the information about the man. The girl accepted the order and said she would immediately start collecting information. The subordinate left the room through the window as fast and unnoticed as she had appeared. Lin was left alone again, but not for long, because the door opened. Rui happily entered and told her mother that according to the fairy tale, the prince kissed Sleeping Beauty and she woke up. Rui smiled happily and promised that if her mother kissed her father, he would also wake up. Shin didn't know how to answer, but thought seriously about her daughter's words. She leaned over and said that it was just a fairy tale. The girl knew that her father had already woken up and wanted her mother to find out, so she insisted. Shin didn't believe it would work, but couldn't refuse her daughter. She agreed, then approached her husband and looked carefully at his face. Lin hadn't seen his wife up close for a long time. Shin put all her love into the kiss, because in the depths of her soul, there was a hope that he would wake up. Rui watched through her fingers, thinking that now Lin would wake up and her mother would jump with happiness. But it was not as she thought. The protagonist did not react. Sin looked at her daughter and said that Daddy did not wake up and it was just a fairy tale. The girl was very upset and didn't understand why her father didn't show Shin that he had come to his senses. Shin took her daughter's hand and promised that she would find her a new father. But Rui was angry because her mother had promised that no one would take Lin's place. She screamed that her mother was a liar. Then Rui took her father's hand and tried to lift him. She sobbed desperately and begged him to wake up. Sin couldn't look at it without tears. Rui was sure Lin could hear her and begged him to tell her mother that he had already recovered. It was very difficult for the protagonist to pretend he was still asleep, so he mentally apologized to his daughter. He needed to reveal Sun's true nature, and for that, he had to pretend to be unconscious. At that moment, Rui saw that her father was not reacting at all. So she continued to cry, while her mother said that maybe Lin would wake up in the future. But right now, she really needed a father to take care of her. The girl did not agree and continued to reach out to her father. The protagonist remained silent, so Rui yelled that he was a liar like his mother. Shin was forced to take her daughter out of the room, asking her not to yell at her father, but Rui couldn't believe that her father would let her mother replace him. Sometime later, the difficult day was coming to an end. Everything was dark outside. A single light was on in only one room of the house. Rui had managed to fall asleep, tears in her eyes, and in her sleep, she mumbled that everyone around her was a liar. Shin was sitting next to her daughter, feeling terribly guilty. At that moment, the door opened and Zhang appeared. She reminded her older sister about the banquet and asked why she was still home. Shin didn't react. Zhang started to pull her hand and insisted that they had to go, adding that after Shin married Sun, Rui would be able to have whatever she wanted. Shin just wanted her daughter to be happy and not sleep with tears in her eyes, so she felt obliged to go. Meanwhile, Lin was still in the room. Ching appeared through the open window, an envelope in her hand. She called the protagonist Master and said that the information on Sun had been collected. Ching added that she had all the necessary information, then handed over the envelope and reminded him that today was Shin's birthday, so Sun was hosting a banquet at the Django Hotel, and the protagonist's wife would be there in about 40 minutes. Lin accepted the information and thanked his subordinate for a job well done. The man opened the envelope and began to carefully read its contents. He couldn't believe that Sun's family had so many unpleasant secrets. He started to get up from his wheelchair and ordered Ching to get ready. Lin was going to the birthday party, and she was going with him. Meanwhile, the sisters arrived at the hotel and were greeted politely by a smiling staff member who confirmed their reservation with Mr. Sun. She reported that a separate room had been reserved for them. After that, they entered the hall and couldn't believe their eyes. Jiang expressed admiration and asked her older sister to look at the huge arch that wished her a happy birthday. But Shin wasn't so happy. Suddenly, Sun adjusted his glasses and said that he was surprised his father had booked the entire hotel. Jiang quickly found herself next to her future brother-in-law, laughing and saying that she wasn't wrong about him. At this moment, footsteps were heard, and a little girl greeted Shin. The child was dressed in a costume and held a box with a beautiful ring meant for the birthday girl. Jiang's eyes lit up when she saw the golden ring with a huge diamond. Sun quickly knelt down and asked Shin to marry him. The hotel staff whispered that Sun's family spared no expense. Sun promised the protagonist's wife that he would take care of her and her family, then asked if she accepted his proposal. It was a very difficult decision for Shin. Her soul was split, and she remained silent. Meanwhile, Ching and the protagonist were sitting near the piano, carefully observing the scene. Ching asked if she should expel the insolent man, but Lin asked her to wait. He looked at his wife, very worried about whether she would accept. At this moment, Shin pulled her hand away from Sun and said that this was too unexpected. She revealed that she was worried about who would take care of Lin. Zhang panicked and tried to convince her sister to agree. Sun heard again that the girl needed to think, but this time he had no intention of backing down. The man stood up and began to reproach her for her ingratitude, reminding her that he had rented an entire hotel for her and promised to take care of her daughter. Jing tried to reason with her sister that she shouldn't marry him because he was rich and influential, but Shin was very angry because Sun dared to reproach her. At that moment, she refused his offer. After the refusal, the man dared to reach out to her. Shin tried to run away, and Sun threatened that if she didn't accept, her family would cease to exist. He tried to prove to the girl that she had no choice, but his threats had no effect. He whispered that she should be obedient so that her daughter would be taken care of properly, then announced that today was her wedding day. The guests began to praise Sun. The protagonist didn't like this attitude towards his wife and told Ching that she would know what to do in a second. Ching appeared behind Sun. He continued to approach Shin, but Ching grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. The girl was furious and ordered him to stop. The guards immediately rushed towards them, but Sun looked confident and calmed them with a gesture, then ordered everyone to leave. The man believed that he was stopped by another beauty who was simply jealous of his fiancée. He stroked Ching's cheek and asked if she also wanted to be hugged. The guards watched and laughed, calling Sun talented. At that moment, Ching couldn't tolerate such treatment and hit the man's face, breaking his glasses. Sun couldn't believe what had happened. He grabbed his cheek and ordered his guards to finish her. The men immediately obeyed and ran towards her, screaming that she didn't understand what she had gotten herself into. A guard was very surprised when, instead of retreating, the girl put her hand in front of his forehead. Then, with a slight movement, Ching pushed the first attacker away. After that, she easily neutralized 3 more guards without much effort. The men ended up on the ground. One of the guards looked at his injured colleagues and didn't understand how it happened. Sun was furious. He shouted that he was the heir, and they were now in his family's territory. Ching looked at him and said that Sun's insignificant family should behave more modestly. At this moment, Shin said she was very interested in finding out who this girl was. Soon, Ching approached her and wished her a happy birthday. Shin was very surprised. Suddenly, a very beautiful song started playing. A man shouted for everyone to look at the stage. The sisters turned their heads and saw a handsome man sitting at the piano, playing a wonderful melody. Jiang couldn't take her eyes off him and shouted that he was very handsome, but Shin recognized her husband. Ching confirmed that he was her master on the stage. Shin didn't understand why this woman called her husband master. Sun was angry that someone had entered the hotel that was booked by his family. He called loudly for the manager. The hotel staff heard his shouts, and the manager called the guards. Soon, a large number of men appeared in the main lobby. The hotel employee apologized and said they would sort things out. Sun felt happy due to the large number of security guards, satisfied that the girl who dared to hit him would get what she deserved. He pointed to Ching and ordered the guards to take her away. However, the men did not listen to his instructions, but started to drag him out of the hotel. The man shouted as he tried to leave, explaining that he was Sun. The hotel employee smiled and said that there was a mistake. The one who had rented the entire hotel was named Lin. At first, Sun acted smug, but then he realized in a panic that everything had not gone according to plan. The manager approached Ching and apologized for the mistake, then ordered his men to listen to the guests and kick Sun out. Sun was dragged out of the hall along with his guards, his screams ignored. The manager thought that compared to Lin, this guy was a nobody. He said on the radio that he was banning Sun's entire family from his hotel. Shin knew the attention was once again completely focused on the man at the piano. She was very curious to know if her husband was really sitting there. Ching told her to go talk to her master. At that moment, Shin's younger sister was delighted with the handsome and rich man her sister probably knew. She asked Shin to introduce him to her, but Shin said she didn't know him. The rest of the guests were delighted with the unique melody played by Lin. Then the noise of explosions caught their attention. One of the guests asked everyone to look at the sky. When they raised their heads, they saw the sky was filled with fireworks, and in the center was an inscription that congratulated the birthday girl. Jiang was delighted with such a romantic gesture, while Shin had mixed emotions after she heard Lin's name. The girl suddenly felt the need to check if it was really her husband. She turned sharply and tried to run towards the piano, but her younger sister grabbed her hand. But the girl didn't stop and ran to Lin. She ran to the piano with full confidence that Lin was waiting for her there. But to her disappointment, there was no one in the room. She was trying to understand why he had left when her sister appeared behind her, saying that Lin was home. Sin heard her sister's words and believed that the protagonist had really gone home, and now she also needed to go back. Lin had actually left the hotel and arrived in the room before his wife. He then asked Qing to collect all the information on the Zhang family's affairs and deliver it to him. The girl apologized for her frankness, but said no one needed to know about him, as she could deal with them personally. The protagonist smiled at his subordinate and asked if she was really worried about the consequences of someone finding out he had woken up. Qing was at the window and preferred not to answer. Suddenly, she saw Shin entering the house, so she said goodbye to the protagonist and announced that his wife was back, adding that she would comply with her master's order. Lin put on his old clothes, planning to hide the news of his awakening for a while longer. Although he didn't want to bother his wife, he was forced to keep the secret. At that moment, Shin passed by her mother, ignoring her questions about the celebration. The mother shouted after her that nothing had changed in the room and the trash was still there. Jiang followed her sister and told their mother that Shin was very successful today. Jiang showed her the recording of the protagonist and said that this rich man named Lin had rented the entire Django Hotel for Shin. Suddenly, the mother told Shin that now that she had found a richer man, she no longer needed to marry Sun. At that moment, Shin opened the door to her room and called for Lin, hoping he would wake up. Tears welled up in her eyes when the girl saw that Lin was still sitting immobilized in the wheelchair. She was sure she had seen her husband in the hotel, but now all her confidence had evaporated. She cried and remembered that 5 years ago, her family had forced her to marry Sun, but she had hated him with all her might. She was very happy when her grandfather introduced her to the protagonist. After that, they spent the night together, and Rui was born. The girl became a ray of hope in Shin's world. But unfortunately, Rui fell ill and needed a bone marrow transplant. Lin saved her but complicated his own health. Shin continued to cry as she thought about it. She understood that although her daughter was saved, her husband had ended up as practically a vegetable. Then, his wife knelt in front of him again and begged the man to come back to her, as she could no longer live like this. Lin looked at his wife, his heart exploding with pain. He mentally promised that she would only have to wait a short time. Jiang watched this scene and said that she could not understand what her sister saw in this vegetable that depended on everyone. Then she remembered the rich man named Lin. So the younger sister entered the room and asked Shin to go with her to a bar. The protagonist's wife didn't want to go anywhere and said she was going to sleep because she had to take Rui to school tomorrow. She suggested going another day, but Jiang didn't want to back down and dragged her sister, saying that they needed to relax. After what had happened, Sun had called Jiang and asked her to fulfill her part of the agreement. The girl didn't want to do it at first, but the man promised that he could make Mr. Lin become her husband. Jiang believed this lie and promised to take her sister to the bar that night. Now Jiang was trying to achieve the desired result. Suddenly, Shin agreed and went to fix her makeup. Jiang hugged her sister and shouted that she was the best sister in the world. Shin headed for the exit, and Jiang looked at the protagonist with an evil smile. She leaned towards Lin and told him that after today, her sister would finally get a divorce. After that, she also left. Suddenly, the protagonist was alone in the room, and Qing appeared through the bedroom window. She reported that she had discovered all the latest affairs of the Jiang family. She began to tell him that there was a financial crisis in their company, and Sun's family had promised to take them to the top if Shin married their son. At that moment, Lin frowned and said that Sun was very calculating, and now they would see if Sun was faster than his blade. After that, the hero saw his wife's car leave the house and ordered Qing to monitor Sun's movements. Meanwhile, at the love bar, Sun was sitting and looking cheerful. The waiters filled his glass and asked if he had any good news. The man laughed uncontrollably and said he had great news, and the people around him congratulated him. Soon, the Jiang sisters entered the bar. Shin asked if they had come to the right place. The men looked at the girls and noticed how beautiful they were. Sun smiled happily and started walking towards them. At that moment, Shin said she wasn't there to see him and demanded an explanation of why he was there. Her younger sister tried desperately to calm things down. Then Shin realized that her sister had teamed up with this man to lure her to the bar. Sun tried to convince her to stay, so he bowed to the girl and admitted that he had acted rashly. He apologized and said he would like to talk to her about it. The protagonist's wife mentally admitted that her family still needed Sun, so she couldn't destroy this relationship. Sun, in turn, promised that it wouldn't happen again, but mentally, he was waiting for the moment he would drag the girl to bed. He went to the counter, took a glass, started to pour wine, and took advantage of Shin's diverted attention to throw a pill into the glass. Then Sun asked the girl to accept a glass of wine as an apology, but Shin replied that she wouldn't because she was driving. However, her sister suggested she have at least a little to prove she had forgiven the man. Jiang grabbed the girl and said that nothing would happen. Shin accepted the glass and drank it all in one gulp. Jiang smiled and said that now Sun must believe in his sister's sincerity. Sun was very happy and was already anxious to take possession of the girl. A few moments later, the protagonist's wife felt bad. She tried to tell her sister that they needed to go back, but the arrogant man pushed her away and stood next to her. After that, he took the girl in his arms. Shin tried to resist, but although there were many people in the bar, everyone was just smiling. In addition, her sister saw what was happening and didn't try to help her. Suddenly, Qing reported that Shin had been captured. Lin ordered his subordinate to find out immediately which hotel she was in. A second later, he was told that she was in the Grand Milky Way Hotel. The protagonist was furious and ordered Ching to inspect the situation, but he wanted to deal with the main problem himself. Sun took the girl to a hotel not far from the bar. Shin said she didn't understand what was happening. She was trying to understand where they were and what the man was going to do to her. Shin wanted to go home, but Sun didn't listen and tried to convince the girl that she had drunk too much. Sun grabbed his victim by the chin and told her that they would sleep together tonight. The girl wouldn't give up so easily and pushed the man away. Soon, a crazy smile appeared on Sun's face as he said that he didn't expect the victim to have the strength to resist. He began to speak perverted words to her. Then Sun took her by the hand and said that she couldn't escape because there were too many of his people around. The protagonist's wife felt disgusted and tried to fight him. The girl understood that she needed to resist with all her strength. At the first opportunity, she bit the man on the ear. This annoyed him, and he pulled her by the hair, then shouted that if she continued, she would meet a terrible end. Sun strangled the girl, saying that she was to blame for not wanting to marry him. At that moment, Shin could only think about her husband. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared at the door of the room. Sun did not recognize the man and shouted that he had entered the wrong place. The hero was intimidating with his appearance alone and promised Sun that he would send his entire family to the cemetery if he touched Shin again. The girl couldn't believe her husband was in front of her. Sun quickly received a punch from Lin in the face and flew to the ground. He carefully examined the unexpected guest and tried to understand how a guy in a wheelchair could have come here, but he continued to sit on the ground and decided to admit defeat for now. In addition to the abrasion on his cheek, Sun also had a black eye. He was sure that the two of them were conspiring against him. This absurd assumption angered the protagonist. Suddenly, Sun stood up with trembling legs and assured him that he would be rescued. For some reason, the man felt superior and began to say that a nobody would never deal with someone like him. He threatened Lin, saying that he would harm his wife and daughter if he dared to touch him. The protagonist couldn't stand it and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Lin decided that this time he would limit himself to just a warning. At that moment, Sun took out his phone and promised that he would soon find out who the true nobody was. Sun's hand was immediately intercepted. Then Lin asked if this was the hand he had touched Shin with. Lin started to twist the guy's arm, and he felt terrible pain, saying that his family would not let this go. In response, the protagonist hit him. The man fell to his knees, and Lin expressed that he didn't care about his influential family. Then the protagonist walked away and promised that if the guy caused trouble again, he would have no mercy. At that moment, Shin felt her eyelids getting heavy, and it was difficult to stay conscious. Her husband approached her and took off his jacket to cover her. Lin promised that he was here now, and everything would be fine, but these words couldn't calm her down completely. She reminded him that he would go to prison for murder. Sun began to rejoice at the girl's words. He felt confident again and began to tease Lin. The protagonist approached again and said that in his eyes, Sun was not a person, then again pushed him to the ground. Sun began to beg for mercy, but the protagonist replied that he would not destroy him for now, as he still had some use. After that, Lin took his foot off the man. His whole body trembled as he asked what Lin wanted. The hero looked at the man who dared to bring his wife against her will to a hotel room. Then he said that he would now teach Sun a lesson. The man tried to convince Lin to retreat, but the protagonist's foot stepped on the man's most vulnerable point, causing him to scream in pain. After that, the protagonist felt that his duty had been fulfilled, and he could leave Sun writhing on the ground. He took his wife in his arms, and she regained consciousness. The girl looked at Lin and was happy that he had saved her. Shin was very afraid that this was just a dream, but her husband promised that it was not a dream and apologized for being late. He then kissed her and called Ching, saying that he would take his wife home to be examined by a doctor. Ching smiled happily. In just 2 years, the world had forgotten about the Supreme Lin after the accident, but now he had recovered and started to show his comeback by destroying Sun's family. After some time, Lin entered the room and saw that his daughter was still sleeping. He leaned on the mattress, and the girl felt his hands. Then she woke up. Suddenly, Rui saw her father and hugged him. Crying, she admitted that she was very afraid of not seeing him again. The girl was worried about her father's health, but the man convinced her that he was just tired and that it was time for them to sleep. Her mother would be back a little later. The man was about to go to the bedroom when the girl grabbed his hand. Rui looked upset and was tormented by the question of if her father would leave during the night, because he had already lied to her. Then the protagonist confessed to the little girl that his plans had changed, and now, under no circumstances, should she tell anyone that he had woken up. Rui promised that she wouldn't even tell her mother, and they swore to keep the secret. Meanwhile, a doctor at a hospital was carefully reviewing the exams of one of the patients. She arrived at Sun's room and said that the only way out for him was surgery, but the risks to his life were too high. The young heir believed that his days were numbered. Suddenly, the doctor said that his only option was amputation. This terrible news made the guy scream, promising to make Lin pay. Meanwhile, Shin was sleeping peacefully in her room. Her daughter was patiently waiting for her. At that moment, Shin opened her eyes and realized that she was in her room. Then she heard Rui's voice, and her head automatically became dizzy. Her daughter laughed happily and said that her mother was a real sleeper. Shin remembered the events of last night and immediately looked at her husband. She saw him in the wheelchair, as always. Then she started to cry because she believed that everything had been just a dream and another man had saved her. Rui took her mother's face in her little hands and asked her not to cry because her father would definitely protect them. Suddenly, Shin's mother entered the room, demanding an explanation from her daughter about who had drugged her. Shin hugged her daughter and said that Sun had put something in her wine, but someone had managed to save her. The woman turned around, ready to deal with the one who dared to invade her daughter's honor, but stopped abruptly and asked if Shin was really talking about Sun. The protagonist's wife was 100% sure of the man's guilt and confirmed her words, but her sister went against her and replied that this was all a misunderstanding. It was also useless for Sun to do this, since Shin was going to marry him. Zhang wanted to protect Sun because she was the one who had taken her sister to that bar, and no one could find out. At that moment, their mother said that Shin must be mistaken. Rui got very angry and shouted to her grandmother that her mother never lies. The old woman threatened the child with her fist and reminded her that she should be quiet when adults speak. The protagonist was very angry, but still could not expose himself. At that moment, the woman's phone rang, and she felt a wave of fear. Sun himself was calling her, and she didn't know what to do. The woman picked up the phone and answered. Sun said that Shin should meet him at his house, or else everyone in the Zhang family would disappear. The conversation ended there. Shin's mother begged her to admit her mistake and apologize to save the family. The girl was very upset with her family's attitude, but was forced to accept. Rui did not like that her mother was forced to apologize to the aggressor. She thought it was unfair. After some time, Lin and Rui were alone. The girl asked her father to tell her mother that he was fine. The protagonist asked his daughter to push him to the park because he was going to fight the bandits and teach them a lesson so that her mom wouldn't be scolded by her grandma. Rui was very happy about it, and the protagonist reminded her that it would remain their secret. Meanwhile, Sun's father was observing his son's state. His wife cried, saying that she couldn't allow anyone to do this to her only son. The man got angry and replied that crying doesn't help, especially since he believed the woman had spoiled her son too much. He believed that Sun had grown up to be trash and was ruining the family's reputation over a woman. Sun tried to convince his father that he had been ambushed. The man was furious at his son's words and believed that he was incompetent. The woman believed that her son was right and the Zhang family was planning something against them. The father walked to the window and said that their assumptions were unfounded because the Zhang family was small compared to them, and he did not consider them dangerous. Even if there was someone behind them, he considered it necessary to interrogate Shin. Sun continued to insist that he was beaten by Shin's husband. The father promised that if he found him, he would tear off his legs and arms. The conversation was interrupted. The protagonist appeared in their house, and an overwhelming, oppressive aura emanated from him. The hero asked how much trouble they had caused that they needed to hire so many guard dogs. The woman quickly hid behind her husband, who asked who Lin was and why he had come to their house. Sun soon got up from the bed and shouted that it was the same Lin who had assaulted him. The father saw that the protagonist dared to break into his house and said that he had a lot of courage. The hero looked at everyone in the room with disdain, considering them unworthy of his wife's apology. Sun's father raised his hand and ordered his men to immediately seize the insolent man. However, Lin said with a satisfied smile that his people were not able to stand up to him, but he could give him time to call others. The man was furious and promised that he would not get away with this. He told the protagonist that he had one last chance to save his life. Lin was only annoyed by such regrettable threats and asked the man if he was so sure of his words. Then the protagonist crossed the room and ended up behind the man who had dared to threaten him. Soon, Lin hit the head of the family in the face and he fell to the floor. The protagonist quickly explained that he could get away with anything. The woman watched all of this and panicked. She even wanted to shout something at him, but fell silent and covered her mouth with her hand as soon as Lin looked in her direction. The man tried to get up from the ground, saying that he didn't care who was behind Lin because he would eliminate everyone. The protagonist appeared in front of him and said that he was as much trash as his son. Sun watched his father's opponent in fear, thinking with horror that the guy didn't look human. Lin emitted a demonic aura that made his opponents tremble. The hero lifted the old man by the throat and heard screams begging for mercy. The woman threw herself at Lin's feet and promised to pay any amount. Sun also realized that without his father, the company would end, so he started begging him to let him go, promising not to bother Shin. Lin said that all their persuasion to resolve the conflict peacefully sounded simply ridiculous. Then he threw the man aside. The father found himself on the floor, trying to clear his throat while his wife was worried. At that moment, Lin gave the family one day to offer their sincere apologies to Shin. Otherwise, their family would disappear. He also ordered them not to tell anyone that they had seen him, because in that case, they would also disappear. The father heard the conditions and felt a wave of anxiety from his last words. The office door closed, and the family was left alone. Again, the head of the family felt humiliated and was not going to let Lin get away with it. These feelings made him furious, and he wanted to find people to end the Zhang family as soon as possible. He got up from the ground and started making calls while his wife checked the hallway. But instead of giving orders, the old man was forced to hear that there was bad news for him. It turned out that all investors had stopped cooperating, and banks had stopped issuing loans. The phone fell from the old man's hands, and he didn't understand how his company, with hundreds of millions, could fail in just one day. Sun was wrapped in a blanket and tried to ask his father what they should do, but the man was deep in thought about Lin's origins and how he could do such a thing. Sun also didn't understand how this was possible, since the Zhang family needed his money. At that moment, the father threw the blanket away and shouted that his corporations were his life's work, so Sun should take the money and run to apologize to Shin. Sun didn't fully believe that his own father was forcing him to apologize. The man was so furious that he started shaking Sun and shouting that if the girl didn't forgive him, he would destroy him. Meanwhile, Shin's mother came out of the house and ordered her to agree to all of Sun's family's demands. Otherwise, they would be screwed. Shin didn't feel strong enough to argue with her mother, so she obediently agreed. They walked towards the gate while the woman wanted Shin to put on a more benevolent expression, but they didn't have time to leave, because outside the gate was the young master's son, sitting on his knees. Shin's mother tried to lift him and convince him that it was her own daughter's fault, but Sun threw her hand away and started shouting that yesterday's situation was all his fault and begged her to forgive him. Sin began to think that this was some kind of trap. The boy took the girl's skirt and begged for forgiveness, promising that he would never bother her again. The protagonist's wife felt disgusted and said that she would only forgive him if he never bothered her again. Sun began to cry with happiness and swore that he would not bother her. This reaction surprised her, and she did not understand what had caused it. In addition to verbal apologies, the boy gave a check for 1 million as moral compensation. Her mother, Li, wasted no time and immediately took the check, while Shin only said she didn't want to see the man again. Sun quickly left. Li tried to find out from her daughter who had helped her deal with a family as influential as the Sun's, but the girl had no answers. The woman thought about it and came to the conclusion that they were helped by yesterday's savior, who had proved to be quite influential. Sun ran away from the Zhang family home, hoping that everything would be fine now. However, he came across Lin and his young daughter. The protagonist looked at Sun with a menacing look. The young man reported that Shin had accepted his apology and asked if there would be any more orders. Lin just said that he hoped they would never meet again. The guy was about to leave when Lin's voice made him stop. The protagonist just wanted to remind him that if he told others about him, his whole family would be destroyed. Out of fear, Sun fell to his knees and shouted that he would definitely keep Lin a secret. Meanwhile, Shin's mother kept saying that she should divorce that loser because there were a lot of good men out there, so there was no reason for her to keep this useless husband. She tried to manipulate the girl and pressured her to think about her feelings. At this time, Rui returned home with her father and found her mother. Shin was surprised when she saw her daughter and Lin. Rui replied that she had taken her father to sunbathe. The protagonist's wife immediately began to hug her daughter, praising her and saying how smart she was. But the old woman did not support her daughter's joy and made a disdainful sound. The girl leaned over to her mother and whispered that her father had dealt with the bad uncles, but that was just their secret. Shin looked at her daughter, shocked by her words, but right after, she laughed and promised to take her to school herself. After some time, Rui got ready for school and saw her father before leaving to check if he was okay. Lin observed his family and felt happy to be involved in their lives, even in this state. As soon as the girls left, Qing appeared. The main character asked her to take him out of the house because he wanted to see his daughter go to school. After some time, we see Shin telling her mother that she wanted her father to pick her up from school. Shin promised her a reward for good behavior. At that moment, Xiao's family stood at the school gate, smugly blocking the passage. Shin hugged her daughter closely and prepared to defend herself. She asked why they were there. The man pointed to his own forehead and blamed Lin for his injury, then promised that this time they would not get off so easily. The woman wanted to receive 200,000 for moral damages. She held her child and said that he hadn't eaten and had lost weight in the last 2 days out of fear. Xiao's father had no intention of backing down. Shin quickly replied that this was impossible because Lin was in a wheelchair. The man approached and started shouting that she could believe him or not, but he would finish off her husband. Rui approached and shouted that if he continued, she would call her father. At that moment, the man felt Lin's frightening aura again and decided that he didn't want to be beaten again, so he took his family and ran away. His wife didn't understand why they were running away if the man had promised to deal with the disabled guy, but the head of the family had a bad feeling and told himself that he would have another chance in the future. At that moment, Shin leaned over to her daughter and explained that she needed to go. Soon, Principal Yang appeared next to the school gate and said that he needed to talk to Shin. She didn't know what he had to talk about. Yang suggested going to his office to discuss everything. The girl thought that this had to do with her daughter. They finally arrived at the office. Yang informed her that Rui's academic contract was ending this year, and the plans for next year needed to be discussed. Xian didn't understand how this could happen. If they had agreed, it would be for 2 years, but only 6 months had passed. The director hesitated and started talking about the limited number of seats and the lack of reservations, but Xin reminded him that she had paid him 50,000 when they closed the deal. The man sat down and explained that 50,000 was an advance payment for admission. This annoyed Shin a lot, since she had paid this money for the first year of study, but the director only laughed, believing that she had fallen for his trick. Then Yang began to say that he could help get a place in the school. The first option would be to pay him 1 million, and he added that his commission would be added to this amount. The man understood that this option would not work for the girl because he knew she did not have that kind of money. Shin was ready to listen to the second option. Yang put his feet on the table and said that he had heard about her husband's condition and hoped that he didn't need to explain the details of the second method. Sin was furious at the principal's words. She slammed her hands on the table and called him disgusting. Yang adjusted his glasses and said that her daughter would not be able to attend the preparatory school on her terms. Shin would not fall for the man's schemes and decided that she would send her daughter to another school. Yang was annoyed and said that none of the prep schools in the city would accept his daughter without his permission. He shouted that the girl would come back tomorrow and beg. Meanwhile, Ching told the protagonist that this school has a good environment and Shin had paid a lot of money so that his daughter could study here. Suddenly, one thing caught his attention. Ching turned Lin towards the exit of the school and he saw his wife running away in tears. He immediately realized that something had not gone according to plan in the principal's room and decided to take a look on his own. At that moment, Xiao's father appeared in front of the principal. Yang got nervous and put on a smile. He tried to pretend that he was very happy to see this family, but in fact, the man just didn't want to ruin his relationship with Xiao, because he was one of the richest people in the area. They quickly expressed that they wanted a little girl expelled from school. The principal realized they were talking about Rui and said that at the end of the semester, she would no longer attend. However, the family was not happy with this decision, and Xiao promised to pay 1 million if the girl left immediately. The principal promised to solve the problem as soon as possible, happy that he could make a fortune so easily. At that moment, the door of the office opened with a loud bang. Everyone immediately looked at Lin. The director didn't understand who he was dealing with and tried to show his power. The mere appearance of Lin made the couple tremble with fear because they already knew him, but Yang didn't pay attention and tried to find out what this man was doing here. Xiao received another severe slap in the face, and his wife was sure that they would be killed. The director was starting to get nervous, but still tried to send Lin away. He was unsuccessful and was truly scared when Lin promised to cut out his tongue if he spoke one more word. After that, the protagonist returned to his confrontation with Xiao and asked why he had stopped swearing. The hero pinned the man's hands to the ground and informed him that if he dared to touch his wife, he could say goodbye to his hands. Lin also gave a significant look at the woman, and she realized that she was also in trouble. The woman knelt down and said that they had accepted their mistake. Lin agreed to let the family go only if they left town that day. The director didn't understand why Lin had so much power. The family accepted and ran away soon after. After that, the protagonist sat on the couch and said he was giving the director the opportunity to explain why he was targeting his daughter. Only after these words did the director realize that the man in his office was Rui's father. But for some reason, the director thought he could threaten Lin. He then tried to intimidate him and said that he would only leave his daughter in this institution if his wife slept with him. Lin felt his anger start to boil and immediately got up from the couch. He kicked the man, breaking his glasses. Yang was lying on the floor, holding his cheek, his whole body shaking. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He took out his phone and shouted in anger that he would make Lin pay for what he had done. But the man didn't have time to call anyone because someone else broke into the office. The director ran, hoping that someone could help deal with the guy, but his boss's face expressed only anger. The school owner had found out what the principal did and asked how he could use his power for personal gain. The boss added that he knew what he had said to Lin's wife. Yang couldn't believe he was being fired. The boss didn't want to be beaten because of a subordinate's mistake and fired the principal. He also ordered Yang to leave the city. The headmaster felt defeated and didn't understand how a vegetable could ruin his life. The boss pushed the former headmaster and ordered him to immediately apologize to the master. Otherwise, he would have a bad end. The boss also apologized to Lin and promised to immediately correct the situation. But this did not impress the protagonist, as he was able to deal with his own problems. The boss realized that the former director was still silent and said that he would not save him. Yang began to actively apologize. The hero leaned over and said that Yang was very mistaken, thinking that he could manipulate people with wealth and power. But from now on, he would have no money or home. The only thing he could do was beg. The boss agreed that this was a deserved punishment and promised Lin that his daughter would receive a better education. The man was very happy that the mayor had managed to call in time and save his life. Lin decided not to interfere anymore and asked everyone present to keep his appearance a secret. The men promised to remain silent, but this incident made it clear that someone upstairs already knew about his awakening. Meanwhile, Shin walked through the park, thinking that all the problems had fallen on her head today. At that moment, her younger sister appeared next to her, asking if she was going to the company. Shin shared her problem about having to pay 1 million for Rui to continue in school. The younger sister was sure that it was due to a lack of status and mentioned son, but this made the protagonist's wife furious. She walked away from her sister and said that from that day on, they would break all ties with his family. At that moment, Jong said that she had heard from her mother about her mysterious boyfriend and suggested asking him for help, but Shin asked her not to talk nonsense. Jong believed that her sister was stupid, mainly because she wanted to continue with a man who didn't move instead of finding someone influential. After the brief conversation, Jong left, leaving her sister to deal with her problems alone. After some time, Jong went to a nearby cafe with Sun. The girl saw his condition and thought he was sick. Sun got angry and thought that Jong could harm him. Jong didn't understand why the guy was angry at her. She said that she just wanted to remind him that he shouldn't be left behind if he wanted to get her sister. Sun smiled and said that the girl really wanted to lead him to his grave. The younger sister remembered that the man had competition and said that she considered him the best candidate. After these words, Sun thanked him, looking very scary at the same time. Jong decided that she no longer needed to be by his side and said that since he had given up, she was leaving. Sun saw the girl leave and called his friend, saying that there was a good job for them. At that moment, Jong walked down the street, thinking it was surprising how quickly the young heir would give up. The girl was very upset when she realized that she would not receive her bag. Suddenly, 2 guys were following her, but the blonde did not pay much attention. The boys looked at the girl carefully and thanked Sun for the work. They promised that they would have a lot of fun with Jong. After that, they appeared in front of the girl, laughing and asking if she was walking alone. Jong was scared and couldn't understand what these 2 men wanted. The guys examined her body and laughed, saying that they wanted her. At that moment, Ching asked the protagonist if she should save the girl, but he decided to teach Jing a lesson first. Lin knew that the blonde was ready for anything for money, but even so, she was his wife's family, so he would see if she really needed his help. Meanwhile, the boys took the girl to an alley, and she begged to be released, promising to pay any amount of money. But Sun had already paid for the work, and they didn't want to waste such an amazing opportunity to have fun. Jang heard Sun's name and didn't understand why the one she had helped would want to harm her. The girl screamed, trying to escape, but her loud screams only made the guys happy. Her clothes were torn. Jong cried and begged for help. At this moment, Ching, as an excellent warrior, was able to neutralize the white-haired guy with one blow, and then just as easily knocked out his partner. Jong was sitting on the ground, covering her body. Ching looked at the girl she had saved and said not to thank her. She ordered Jong not to interfere in her older sister's affairs. Otherwise, she wouldn't come to help anymore. After these words, the girl left the alley, leaving Jong alone. The girl was still crying and thought seriously about why this woman called her sister ma'am, and especially who was the master who had sent her. Jong covered her body and felt guilty for forcing her sister to stay with Sun. Meanwhile, Ching was once again by the protagonist's side. They hoped the girl had learned her lesson. Ching agreed. Then she told the protagonist that soon they would have the Ben Hai feast, but Lin denied that they would. At this moment, a guard went to Sun and informed him that 2 of his men had been eliminated. Sun was very surprised when he realized that the 2 of them had failed the task. The guy wouldn't stop because of a failure and promised himself that Jong's torment was just beginning. He saw a great way to deal with Jong and called his good friend Lu. A lot of time had passed, and the Ben Hai celebration was approaching. At that moment, Sun appeared at Shin's house again. The man assured them that he came only with good intentions. Shin's mother didn't notice the strange behavior and happily supported him. Sun asked if the girls knew about the Ben Hai celebration that would take place in 2 weeks. The mother immediately got excited because this celebration was a very important event, and she hoped that he would take them. Sun replied that his family was not invited, so it was impossible to take her, but he promised to introduce a friend who could. Lin's wife did not want to hear more, so she got up from her seat and said she was not interested. Her mother, Lee, didn't let her daughter leave and grabbed her with force, asking her to take advantage of such a good opportunity. While the woman tried to convince her daughter, the guy thought that he himself would go to the celebration if Jong agreed, so he would take the sisters. Suddenly, Rui appeared along with her father. Sun didn't expect that this demon would come back so soon, so he was very nervous. At that moment, Sun bowed to the girls and asked them to inform him about their decision as soon as possible. Lee believed that it was Jong's responsibility to accept the invitation. Jong, after the recent incident, was in no hurry to trust Sun so willingly. She came down and told her mother about it, but Lee was furious because she was sure that the young master would never do that. Jong didn't argue, but doubt settled in her soul that the criminals would attack her again. At this moment, Shin said that yesterday her grandfather had called her and ordered her to go to the main house. Lee was not very happy with this prospect and didn't understand why the man needed her daughter. Shin replied that she did not know the details, but felt that it was necessary to leave as soon as possible. The main house of the Jiang family was much larger than the country house. The grandfather sat at the head of the table and said, disgruntled, that the family had not received an invitation to the celebration. A guy noticed that although their business had improved this year, the influential families still did not pay attention to them. A blond man looked at Shin and hinted that someone could help them attract attention. The girl was very surprised when she realized that even this part of her family depended on her. The grandfather had not worried much about Shin in the last few years, but reminded her that he always provided money when needed. The old man crossed his hands and said that he needed the girl to do him a favor. She believed that her grandfather was joking, because she honestly didn't understand what she could do. The blonde man asked disdainfully if she didn't want to help the family. The cousin said that the girl was pretending not to understand. Shin believed that she couldn't solve a problem that the head of the family couldn't handle. However, the old man explained that an influential person was interested in her and could help them get to the party. Shin felt a growing anxiety and said that no one could be interested in her since she already had a child. The cousin smiled sarcastically and added that the girl should thank her for the opportunity. The uncle also decided to chime in. The protagonist's wife jumped out of her seat and told everyone that she was a married woman, not a toy. But her words had no effect, and the uncle said that it was better to be a toy than to serve a vegetable. Shin tried to defend her husband's honor. The grandfather knocked on the table and promised that if his granddaughter complied with the request, the family would never forget. But the protagonist's wife would not agree. She said she wouldn't allow herself to lose her dignity and wouldn't use her body. Shin said she would honor her husband, and if someone wanted to go ahead with this plan, they could go alone. She didn't understand how someone could ask for something like that. The old man didn't take no for an answer. At that moment, the cousin began to pressure the girl about the consequences of her actions, but the protagonist's wife remained firm, believing that only she had the right to decide what to do with her body. Suddenly, the cousin began to threaten Shin, saying that something could happen to her husband. It seemed that this girl was jealous of Shin's beauty, and she kept asking what people saw in her. She took the opportunity to push her onto the table, then threw her to the ground. At this point, the cousin shouted that this was her last chance for Shin to make the right decision, and added that the lives of her loved ones would depend on it. Although it was painful for the protagonist's wife, she agreed to give up her principles for the sake of her daughter's and husband's safety. The grandfather waved his hand in her direction and promised to save his family's life if the girl received an invitation to the celebration. The frustrated girl left the main house of the Jeong family. Sometime later, Shin returned home and immediately went to the park with her husband. The girl was sitting on a swing and decided to tell her husband what her grandfather had said. Shin told Lin that someone influential was interested in her, and she knew that she was obliged to entertain him if she did not want to bring problems to the protagonist and his daughter. The girl unfortunately said that she would have to get a ticket because otherwise they would destroy her family. The blonde hugged her husband, saying that she did not want to cheat on him, but she knew that she was not ready to lose them. So she apologized to Lin because that was the only way she could protect them. The protagonist was furious with this treatment of his wife, and his hands were illuminated with blue fire. Lin put his wife to sleep and sat her on the chair. The protagonist promised that he would catch everyone who dared to intimidate his wife. After that, Ching instantly appeared nearby. She bowed and was ready to carry out any request. Lin decided that he would not hide that he had woken up anymore and ordered Ching to inform everyone about his presence at the Benhai celebration. Meanwhile, Shin's mother was confused when she saw her father at her house. At that moment, the cousin introduced a guy named Lu Shaol. The guy sat next to Li and started smoothing her hair while she tried to understand what was happening. At that moment, the grandfather asked her to call Shin soon because they couldn't leave a person as influential as Lu waiting. Li explained that her daughter had taken Rui to school, then decided to ask why they were there. The cousin reported that Lu liked Shin, so if the girl didn't bring trouble, the Zhang family wouldn't need anything else. Li was very happy. The cousin contemptuously told her that it was all thanks to her grandfather's efforts. After a few minutes, the sisters returned home. Lu began to look at the girls' bodies and praised the cousin's choice. Zhang's joy diminished when she saw her grandfather, who had previously promised that he would leave them alone. The grandfather introduced Lu and said that he was the one Shin should accompany. The man cleared his throat and said he was looking forward to their new meeting. Li approached her eldest daughter and ordered her not to waste the great opportunity. The grandfather was dissatisfied with his granddaughter's behavior because she didn't greet the guest, but Lu didn't consider it something terrible and added that shyness on the first date is completely normal. The guy decided to introduce himself first and started to say which company he owned, but Shin walked away. The old man restrained himself with all his strength from putting Shin in her place. Lu didn't like the attitude and asked if the family wasn't welcoming him. Cousin Yan hit Shin and shouted that she was just a nobody for allowing herself to behave like this. The girl stood over the protagonist's wife and demanded that she immediately apologize to Lu. At that moment, Yan was interrupted by Lu, and he said that getting tickets had become much more difficult. Shin sat on the couch and covered her cheek while being threatened that with this attitude they might not receive an invitation. The cousin clung to Lu and assured him that her grandfather would solve everything. Suddenly, a threatening smile appeared on Lu's face, and he added that he would need one more person. He replied that Zhang would also go with him. Zhang didn't like this news very much, but the grandfather just lit a cigarette and told the boy that he could take the two sisters with him. Li yelled at Zhang because the girl didn't want to go and explained that Shin would protect her from trouble. Lu hugged the confused girl to himself and ordered the sisters to go with him. The man believed that it would only be beneficial for the girls to accompany him for one night and receive his reward. Shin didn't want to participate, but the guy reminded her of the safety of her daughter and husband. Lu was happy to see how the beauty obeyed the family rules and threw away her principles. Our main character watched this scene carefully, hiding behind the wall of the stairs. He called Qing and ordered them to cancel the invitation of the Zhang family and invite only Xin. Meanwhile, outside the house, the sisters approached the gate, and Lu was about to leave. But Qing appeared in front of him and ordered him to stop. Lu didn't understand who the girl was, but Qing said that he couldn't take the girl with him to the celebration. The girl was serious and told him to prepare for a tragic end. The guy assumed that the beauty in front of him was simply jealous and also wanted a ticket to the celebration, but his mood dropped instantly when Qing reported that his invitation had been disqualified. Jiang watched the girl and wondered who she was because she always showed up to save them. Lu didn't believe that a family with a multi-billion-dollar fortune couldn't be invited and thought that the girl in front of him was just an actress. Qing was tired of talking to this guy. At this moment, Xin asked Qing not to worry. Lu had no intention of letting the sisters leave and threatened to make Xin crawl on her knees in front of him. Qing couldn't tolerate the insult and slapped him hard in the face. The guy fell to the ground, screaming in anger. He shouted that after this offense she would be destroyed, but Qing naturally threatened to cut out his tongue. Suddenly, the old grandfather appeared in the courtyard. He was angry because he knew that his family would probably miss the invitations. Lin's wife was confused when the old man blamed her, and she replied that she had no influence on what happened. The man wanted to yell at her, but was interrupted by Qing's screams. The girl repeated that Lu had no invitations and was disqualified from attending the event. In addition to this, she conveyed that of the entire Jiang family, only Xin was invited to the Benhai celebration. This surprised everyone present, especially the grandfather, who didn't know the Master Lin the girl had mentioned. Qing bowed her head to Xin and promised that an exclusive invitation would be delivered to her soon. The old man didn't believe the girl because he didn't believe that exclusive invitations were given to people on the street. At that moment, a man appeared near the gate and said he had to deliver an invitation to Xin. The grandfather couldn't doubt this man's words, but he couldn't understand how Xin could be invited. Lu got up from the ground and recognized the man as Wang. The guy didn't expect to see him here. Lu told everyone that this man was the organizer of the Benhai celebration, so now he would prove that he was invited. But Wang looked at the beaten man and asked who he was and why he was acting so rudely. Lu pointed to himself and reminded him that he was the heir of the Lu family. The organizer of the celebration recalled that this year Lu's family could not attend. The old elder received confirmation that Lu's family was deprived of participating in the celebration by the organizer himself. At that moment, Wang asked his assistant to expel Lu so that he would not bother the master. After that, the man smiled sweetly and took out the letter, wondering who Xin was. The protagonist's wife was very worried when she saw that the man was looking for her, but Wang bowed and extended an exclusive invitation sent by Mr. Lin, asking the girl to go to the celebration. Xin accepted the invitation and asked if this Lin was the same person who had rented the hotel for her. The man confirmed that this was not the first time Lin had given lavish gifts to the lady. Jiang thought that if her sister married this master, they would never have problems again, so she asked if they could meet him. Meanwhile, the protagonist observed the situation from his bedroom window and thought that his wife's younger sister had a short memory. Soon, Wang explained to the girl that the Lord had many important things to do now and had no time for guests. Qing looked carefully at the blonde and reminded her that she should not interfere in Xin's affairs. Jiang felt the seriousness of Qing's words and trembled with fear. Then, after being slightly annoyed, she replied to Qing that her sister would not let go of her husband. The organizer soon replied that his work was done and bowed before Xin. Qing reminded him that his duties were done and he should go. Suddenly, the old man approached his granddaughter and tried to find out who this master was who had been at Xin's birthday party. Cousin Yan quickly took the girl's invitation and asked ironically what method she had used to conquer this guy. Yan believed that only she was worthy of going to the celebration, but Xin didn't want to give up her seat because she really wanted to check if this master was her husband. But the grandfather stressed that Xin insisted on putting her husband and daughter above her family. He really wanted Xin to abandon the protagonist and focus on making them rich. Moreover, the old man believed that Lin had become a burden to his family, so Xin allowed the invitation to be withdrawn as long as her family was not affected. Yan was happy because she believed that Xin was not worthy of an invitation. At this moment, the protagonist and Qing watched this scene. Lin's servant really wanted to go back and teach them a lesson, but the hero forbade her and promised that in the future he would make them regret their existence. At that moment, Qing's phone rang. The school principal said that Rui had been sent to the hospital. Lin heard that his daughter had lost consciousness and ordered Qing to start the car immediately. After a few minutes, they arrived at Benhai Central Hospital, where Rui had been brought unconsciously. The doctor carefully examined the test results. Qing and Lin entered the room, asking how the girl was feeling. The doctor replied that he had ruled out other options and found that the girl had a relapse of an old disease. Lin sat on the bed and asked if it would be possible to transplant bone marrow to save her again, but the doctor decided that first they should invite Dr. Li to come see Rui. The protagonist was very surprised that Dr. Li was in town. The doctor replied that Li had come back as soon as he heard the rumor about the master's awakening and was now in the hospital. Lin immediately sent his servant to find the doctor and ordered him to be brought quickly. At this moment, the doctor decided to ask if the protagonist knew the severity of Rui's illness. Lin replied that he was seriously injured at that time and did not fully understand his daughter's condition. The doctor said that it turns out that 2 years ago, Rui had awakened the imperial and royal lineage at the same time, which was why she had fallen into a coma. The protagonist was scared and couldn't believe his ears, but Dr. Li appeared in the room and assured him that the great man had nothing to worry about, because he had come to help the princess. The old man was so happy to see Lin again that tears appeared in his eyes. This reaction made the men in the room feel uncomfortable, and they looked at each other in silence. The god of war decided to return to the main conversation because he was worried about the blood fusion in his daughter. Normally, no royal and imperial bloodline would appear in the same person, but Dr. Li said that nowadays there are only 3 people who have both. The protagonist knew that he had both, and there was also another boy in the capital, but he wondered who the third person was. Li waited for a dramatic pause and then, with a burst of energy, revealed that the third person was Rui. Then the doctor's aura flew around her. The protagonist didn't like it and shouted Qing's name. The girl imperceptibly moved behind the old man. Qing held her palm next to his neck and asked the master to explain himself more clearly before touching the girl. Li said that Lin's royal bloodline had been personally forbidden years ago and shouldn't have affected his daughter. He then asked if the god of war wanted to know why this was happening. Lin was unsure where the imperial bloodline came from and allowed Qing to let the doctor go. The old man promised that if the girl was by his side, no one would recognize her as a descendant of the imperial bloodline. Lin really expected that and decided to trust Dr. Li for now. Qing remembered that the school also had to notify Xin, and she would soon be here. The protagonist realized it was time to leave and told Li that he would know what to explain to Xin. Soon after, the protagonist's wife ran through the hospital corridors as fast as she could. She was very nervous and didn't even pay attention to Sun. The guy wanted to know what she was doing here, but his friend got mad because he didn't want any trouble. Sun received a slight blow to his friend's head and admitted that this time he had nothing to do with it. He guessed that the girl was worried about her child. Lu didn't understand why they needed this information, and then Sun explained that Xin would definitely need money for the treatment. Lu knew the poor state the Zhang family was in and prepared to use his chance to make the blonde beg for him. At that moment, Xin burst into the room and asked worriedly what had happened to her daughter. Li asked the woman to be quiet so as not to wake up the little princess. The girl did not expect to see a second doctor besides Chen, so she asked who he was. Dr. Chen introduced his mentor and promised that Rui was safe. He then snapped his fingers, and Rui began to stir in her bed. Li said that the girl would soon wake up thanks to acupuncture. Suddenly, Rui opened her eyes and tried to find her father in the room because she was sure she had heard his voice. The mother appeared next to her, saying that she had fainted at school, so she was lucky to meet this doctor who used traditional Chinese medicine. Rui recognized the man as a brilliant doctor. The old man couldn't contain his feelings and said that the baby was very kind to him. He leaned over to the girl and started hugging her. Xin was worried that she wouldn't be able to pay for the doctor's appointment because her family wouldn't give her a dime. The man noticed her concerns and said that he would not receive payment from her since he had come in the name of Mr. Lin. At that time, Rui realized that she wasn't imagining things and had actually heard her father's voice. Xin quickly asked if the doctor could tell her who this Mr. Lin was and why he was always helping her. Li couldn't tell the secret, so he just said that Lin was the supreme lord of the southern border and she would find out the details when the time was right. Then the doctor returned the girl to her bed and handed her mother a business card, ordering her to call if necessary. Now that Rui was awake, the man was convinced that she was okay, so he could say goodbye and leave. The girl called her mother and confessed that Dr. Li had been invited by her father and she had heard his voice while she slept. Although Xin normally didn't believe her daughter's words, she decided to agree because she wanted the great Lord Lin to really be her husband. She had never met this unknown man, and Lin's personality would explain a lot. What really bothered her about this theory was the fact that the protagonist didn't directly tell her that he had woken up. Rui noticed that her mother was thinking about something, and these thoughts bothered her a lot, but the woman pretended that nothing was wrong. She winked at her daughter and said that they would go home. Suddenly, Dr. Chen intervened, saying that the little princess should remain under observation for a few more days. Xin was worried about having to leave Rui alone in the hospital, but her daughter seemed inspired and promised her mother that she could have some alone time. After that, the girl remained in the hospital to recover. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still in the hospital and asked his subordinate if she had found information about the head of the Jiang family. Qing wasted no time and managed to find something strange in a short period of time. The girl reported that everyone in the family was ordinary, but Qin's father had something different. The protagonist recalled that he had met his wife's father only once, and soon after, he had passed away. The subordinate confirmed the information and said that she had discovered rumors that he was not the true heir. Lin became interested in this information and realized that if this was true, then the status of his wife's father was in question. Li said that with the help of his position in society, he was able to discover that the emperor had light-haired heirs. This fact could mean that Shin's father was a descendant of the emperor, but it was impossible to know for sure. The old man admitted that he wanted to accept the princess as a disciple. Lin allowed the man to teach the girl how to control her abilities and asked him what else he needed. Li asked Lin to allow him to enter the Ben Hai celebration. He really wanted to see Lin's return. Meanwhile, Shin had no choice and had to leave her daughter at the hospital, so she asked the girl to listen to Dr. Chen. Shin promised Rui that she would definitely come after work. The mother assured her that everything would be fine and then said goodbye. Suddenly, Shin received a call from her cousin. The protagonist's wife didn't understand what more she could want if she had already taken the invitation. Yan ordered the girl to go to the company now. After half an hour, Shin went to the office. When she approached the finance department, she heard loud screams. Yan was inside with a cup of coffee and shouted furiously at the employees, asking what they were doing there. Shin didn't want to see her cousin, but needed to find out why they were looking for her. The girl turned to Shin and was surprised that she was asking such stupid questions. Yan said that Shin was a financial manager and was away from work while the company was in crisis. Then she threw coffee at Shin, but the woman managed to dodge and remembered that she had asked for time off today. Yan didn't believe it and promised to deduct half a month's salary, adding that next time she would fire her. Shin tried to argue, but it was no use because the girl believed that her company was in crisis because of people like Shin. The blonde did not consider that the crisis was on her shoulders and remembered that all accounts went through Yan. The cousin realized the accusation and ordered her to get the company out of the crisis in 3 days, or Shin would be fired. The time was extremely short, and Shin thought that Yan was joking, but that was not the case. The cousin repeated that she would fire her if she failed. Yan was pleased with herself and believed that Shin would never deal with it. Meanwhile, Sun was sitting in the office and said that just like Lu, he was also tired of waiting, but he added that Yan had promised that there would be no problems with Shin this time. Lu was already anxious to know how he would gain an advantage over the girl. Sun smiled happily and was confident that this time they would succeed, but his friend couldn't relax because he remembered that this wasn't their first plan. Sun replied that he had a plan B if the first one went wrong. He then questioned Yan's words, which made the cousin worried, and she replied that she wouldn't tell anyone anything. Yan winked, and the men thought that the genetics of the Zhang family were not fair to her. Lu wanted to know from his friend what his plan was because he wanted to be prepared for anything. Sun said that in Shin's life, there are two important people, the very small Rui and her husband Lin. Meanwhile, the protagonist went to his daughter's room and asked if the girl would accept becoming a disciple of Dr. Li. Rui asked if the man would teach her how to heal people. The god of war looked at his daughter with adoration and wanted to say what Li would teach, but he didn't have time because Qing appeared behind him and reported Shin's problems in the company. The Zhang family was planning to confiscate their house to pay for the losses. Lin asked if anyone was behind it. The subordinate reported that several people had seen Lu and Sun in the finance department. Rui was afraid for her mother, but her father convinced her that he would take care of the problems himself and that she should recover. Qing waited for her master's orders and asked if she should bring them to him. The protagonist decided that they would deal with them when the time came, but for now, they would take care of Shin. Meanwhile, the wife of the god of war sat in her office for hours and couldn't think of a way out of the situation. It turned out that all the company's partners had withdrawn their investments, and even the bank had refused a loan. The girl was very worried because there was only 1 day left to solve the problem. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of doors opening, and someone entered Shin's office without knocking. This person was Sun, and he was following his plan by going to the girl at a difficult time for her. The guy behaved relaxed and told the girl that he had come to help her nobly. Shin got up from the table and didn't plan to accept Sun's help, then asked him to leave. The man pressured the girl, reminding her that her family would be homeless, but even that didn't convince her. The guy said that he always helped others, then said that he wouldn't bother her anymore and walked to the exit. At that moment, he said that if she wanted his help, she should go to the hotel by 9 o'clock in the morning. Shin was angry at this behavior and shouted that she would never make a deal with such an unscrupulous person. The boy didn't argue. He just said that he would wait for her tomorrow at the scheduled place. The protagonist's wife noticed that this situation had been set up by her cousin and son. At that moment, we see Shin's mother going through a stack of papers. She asked why the company's things were sent to their house. The daughter had no choice and said that Yan would confiscate her house. The woman was furious with the news because problems were constantly falling on her family, but she believed that her daughter would ask that guy named Lin to help them and that it would not be a problem. But the protagonist's wife replied that she had never even seen this man. Li, as always, began to blame her daughter for all the family's problems. Shin did not want to disappoint her loved ones, and since the Wong family did not respond to her letter, the girl would have to ask Sun for help. The day of the meeting arrived, and the time of the scheduled meeting was approaching. The protagonist's wife arrived at the hotel and saw the right room. She entered and immediately shouted for Sun that she had come, but the man near the window was not Sun. The girl was looking at her feet and didn't notice. Suddenly, Wang walked away from the window and greeted the girl kindly. Shin saw Wang and concluded that the guy was conspiring with the Sun family to destroy their company. The man approached the blonde and explained that it was a misunderstanding. He said he was just short on time and handed her a check. Wong added that Mr. Lin would take care of everything and had switched the room number with a trick, which was why he was the one in this room. Shin was very happy and was sincerely grateful to the person who had saved her. Wong left the room, leaving the girl inside. He then instantly became serious. He met with the protagonist and reported that his wife's problem had been solved. Now Lin was going to punish the offender. Meanwhile, Lu was sitting in another room. The guy was angry because Shin hadn't come to him yet. He admitted that the girl was hard to break. Lu's phone rang, and Sun appeared on the screen, saying that he knew he could kidnap anyone. Suddenly, the guy heard a knock on the door and ran to answer, thinking it was Shin. However, at the door, he saw a completely different girl from what he expected. Ching was there and kicked the man in the face very hard. Lu flew back and hit the table, knocking over the dishes. The girl had broken the guy's lip with the blow. Lu didn't understand why that strange girl pestered him and constantly appeared. Ching didn't answer him and went back to the corridor, calling for Lin. Lu looked at the newcomer and was surprised because the guy looked very familiar. The protagonist introduced himself as a soldier who had served in the army for many years and became known as the supreme leader of the South. Lu felt his body trembling with fear and wondered why the guy was helping Shin. Lin explained that she was his wife and pushed the guy to the ground. Lu didn't believe that a disabled person could be the leader of the South. At that moment, the protagonist emitted a powerful aura and said he didn't care if the guy believed him. The man leaned towards Lu and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him in the air. Lin believed that the most important thing now was to make the guy pay for his humiliation. Lu believed that the protagonist wouldn't dare to do something to him because he was one of the richest heirs, but the guy was wrong and flew against the wall with great force. He was seriously injured and no longer had any doubts about the protagonist's position. He started begging for forgiveness, promising to pay any amount of money. Lin looked at the guy and asked if he really looked like someone who needed money. Ching watched with a satisfied smile as her master made the guy feel the consequences of his actions. Lu's arm was broken and the rest of his body hurt, but the protagonist decided to stop and said that this was just a warning. Lin wanted the beaten guy to understand that next time he would not be forgiven. At that moment, the hero was about to leave and, as always, advised him not to talk about his identity. After that, they were walking down the hotel corridor when Ching asked if Lin was afraid of something happening. The protagonist promised that if Lu's family tried something, they would all be ruthlessly annihilated. Suddenly, the girl's phone rang, and she paused the conversation. Ching was very scared when Dr. Chen reported that the little princess had been kidnapped and her whereabouts were unknown. Lin was also unhinged by this news, and they rushed to the hospital, protecting Shin from this news. They arrived at the infirmary in record time. Dr. Chen was there, and the god of war wanted to know when his daughter had disappeared. Chen said that he had brought her breakfast and had gone to prepare for physical therapy. But when he returned, Rui was no longer there. The protagonist hated himself for not being able to prevent the kidnapping. Anger filled his body, and he destroyed the floor of the infirmary with one blow. Chen fell to his knees and admitted that it was all his fault and that he should have taken better care of the little princess. But the protagonist said that he didn't blame him for the kidnapping because the doctor was busy fulfilling his duties. These words left Chen lost. Then Lin ordered Ching to immediately go to the security checkpoint and find the kidnapper. At that moment, a guard was sitting in a small room, engrossed in a game. He was sure that he had to win. Just at this moment, Ching appeared behind him. She distracted the guard and reported the disappearance of the patient, asking to see the camera footage. But the man demanded more detailed information about the missing person. Ching clarified that the patient was a child and she had disappeared about an hour ago. The guard turned to Ching irritably and said that only an hour had passed and they needed to search the hospital first. The man continued to play on his mobile phone and informed her that he would only start the search after a day had passed. Suddenly, a beam of light knocked the phone out of the guard's hands, scaring the man. Lin had no intention of wasting his time. The security guard got angry and shouted that he could not provide records, and besides, the place was forbidden to outsiders. The protagonist released his frightening aura, and Ching realized that heads would possibly roll, so she hurried to stop her master and decided to present a token stating that they were members of the imperial family. The guard was speechless when he saw the card that represented the imperial family and was a symbol of supreme power. Ching strongly recommended that they hurry up and provide the recording. She saw that Lin began to calm down, and the guard quickly went to the computer. He began to look for records from the last hour and finally found a moment when they could clearly see Rui sleeping in her room. The protagonist looked carefully at the recording and asked to enlarge the lower panel. The recording showed that a man in a white coat had lifted the sleeping girl from her bed and taken her in an unknown direction. The guard looked at the silhouette of the kidnapper and realized that he looked somehow familiar. Lin heard this, and the man reported that this man looked like a hospital intern named Zhao Gong. Qing noticed that she had not seen this guy yet. The guard replied that Zhao was not very popular and had gotten into the institution through contacts. He added that 2 days ago, Zhao had come to talk to him and had asked about the hospital surveillance. This turn of events complicated the situation. Lin began to lose control of himself again. He gave Qing only 5 minutes to find Zhao Gong. The girl did not argue about the deadline and immediately disappeared from the office to comply with the order. The guard sensed the oppressive atmosphere and began to worry that he had done something wrong. Lin's dark mood could be felt from a great distance, so the guard chose not to interfere. The protagonist sat in the chair, and the man tried to understand if members of the imperial family were always this terrifying. Qing was soon able to complete the task, and within minutes, Zhao was brought to the office. She threw him at Lin's feet and reported that her people had found him sneaking through the hospital and had immediately grabbed him. The intern protested, saying that he was a doctor, which was why he was in the hospital. Lin demanded to know where the boy had taken the child. Zhao pretended that he didn't understand what child they were talking about. The protagonist had no more patience, and soon his foot began to press on the kidnapper's shoulder so hard that the ground began to crack. Lin pressed until Zhao's right hand was completely crushed. Qing and the guard watched the interrogation. The man was very nervous about the cruelty with which Lin acted. However, the kidnapper could not stand the torture and said that he had been hired. The god of war was happy to hear such a statement because now he could give himself a reason to stop trying to control himself. Lin got up from his seat and hit Zhao hard. Although at first glance the blow didn't seem strong, Zhao was badly hurt and spat out blood. The protagonist didn't allow the guy to catch his breath and stepped on his chest, pressing him to the ground with his leg. Zhao tried to seize the moment and pretend he had lost consciousness. Qing immediately saw through him and asked Lin to let her make him talk, but the protagonist replied that he wasn't going to waste time on such things. The young doctor realized that he only had one chance to survive, so he promised to tell everything and immediately said where he had taken Rui. Zhao could barely speak, but said that he had put the girl in Sun's car and he had taken her to his house. Lin wasn't too surprised when he heard that name, but now he was sure that Sun would meet his end. Zhao said that Sun had forced him to go into the hospital and kidnap the girl, then asked to be released. But Lin believed that the guy had made a terrible mistake, and even exterminating him was not enough. After that, the protagonist asked Qing to handle the kidnapper's body and then follow him to Sun's house. Meanwhile, at Sun's property, it was quiet. Rui was tied to a chair, and she yelled for her uncle to let her go. She added that she was sure that the police would arrest him. However, Sun laughed, saying that without evidence, no one would dare to break into the home of an influential family. Sun was a disgusting person and blamed Shin for his actions. The man believed that he had to repay the girl for ruining his health. Sun pulled her cheeks, and the girl said that her mother had never done anything wrong. Rui kept resisting because she was sure that her father would soon appear and save her. Sun hit the girl's forehead because she dared to mention Lin in front of him. He said that this garbage was the cause of his suffering. Rui began to cry loudly and suddenly heard the sound of breaking glass. The protagonist appeared behind Sun and immediately hit him in the face. The wall broke and he fell to the ground. The girl saw her father and the tears immediately stopped flowing. Rui was happy to see Lin, and he started to untie her from the chair, promising her that everything would be fine. The girl told her father that she was waiting for him, and the man began to carefully examine his daughter, looking for injuries. The girl said that the bad uncle had managed to hit her in the forehead, but as soon as her father arrived, the pain went away. Lin picked up Rui and asked if she was ready to teach the bandit a lesson. The little girl replied that she was. Sun trembled when the girl told her father that she didn't remember which hand her uncle had hit her with, but she said it was very painful. Sun decided to take advantage of the moment and try to run outside. He wondered how Lin had found him so quickly. The god of war listened carefully to his princess's story and drew his own conclusions. Sun was already near the exit and believed that he would be saved as soon as he ran out into the street, because he believed that Lin wouldn't hit him in front of everyone. But the guy didn't take into account the fact that Lin was considered the god of war, and his speed was beyond human comprehension. That's why Sun's escape failed, and now he would have to accept his punishment. Lin looked at the scared kidnapper and said he didn't remember letting him out. Every second, Sun realized the gravity of his offense and was overcome by horror. He decided to try to fight back and aimed for the hand with which the protagonist held his daughter. Then Sun ran as fast as he could and asked for help, hoping that his parents would save him. Naturally, he didn't get far because Lin held him tightly by the hand. Then with a skillful movement, he twisted Sun's arm, causing him to scream in pain. Rui covered her ears and complained to her father that it was too noisy. The protagonist promised that the bad uncle would be silent now, and immediately a blue flame appeared in his left hand. This fire was directed at Sun, and he screamed loudly, causing the girl to close her eyes. Sun's eyes darkened, and instead of screams, almost inaudible squeaks escaped from his mouth, and he fell to the ground. At that moment, Lin heard the scream of the head of the family. The man broke into the room and begged him to spare his son. The father looked in shock at his son's state and realized that it was very bad. His chest was burned, and his whole body was covered with bruises. His eyes were rolled back. His father fell to his knees before the god of war and begged him to have mercy and forgive Sun's stupid mistake. But the protagonist was not affected by these words because they had not felt sorry for his daughter. The head of the family knew that they were at a disadvantage. The next moment, Qing appeared in the room and reported that everything was fine at the hospital. Rui was frightened by such a sudden appearance, but her father explained that this aunt was his friend and there was no need to be afraid of her. Then Lin handed Rui to Qing to finish off the evil uncles alone. Sun's father couldn't handle the fear. Rui held Qing's shoulders and wished her father success in taking revenge on Sun. When Rui left the room, the protagonist could show all his power. He remembered that he had shown kindness once before. The head of the family tried to take the blame on himself and hoped to convince Lin to save his life. The god of war reminded the man that he had no right to impose conditions. At this moment, Sun was trying to crawl backwards, but this time his pleas were useless, and Lin finished him off with one blow. The father couldn't do anything and had to watch his own son die. It all ended when Lin said it was too late to beg for mercy and that he didn't give anyone second chances. He took advantage of his speed and approached Sun's father, who was still in shock. The hero took the man's head and said that it was better for his family to get out of town within one day, because if they stayed, they would be beheaded. The father understood that if he didn't want to go to the next world, he would have to agree with Lin and leave the city. After all these events, at Lu's property, his father broke into the room, furious, wanting to find out who had dared to hit his son. The father promised to tear the culprit to pieces. Lu wanted to complain to his father as always, but suddenly remembered that if he dared to reveal Lin's identity, the man would destroy him. So for the sake of the family's well-being, the guy had to shut up. He became apathetic and admitted that he didn't know what to say. The head of the family also got angry with his son and slapped him hard in the face, saying that Lu should remember that they owned the city. Lu wondered if the Zhang family had more power and decided to keep Lin's identity a secret for now. The father considered his son weak, but added that his story was unnecessary, as he had already hired an investigator. Suddenly, a man appeared next to them and reported that he had managed to discover the connection between the culprit and the Zhang family. The father was ready to destroy the entire Zhang family at once. He noticed that the investigator wasn't leaving and assumed he had more news. He was right. The man talked about Sun's murder and added that the killer was the same person who had beaten Lu. Horror ran through Lu's body, and he was seriously worried that he would be next. His father considered Sun's family a failure for not being able to deal with someone like the Zhang family. The man was completely consumed by the desire for revenge and figured out how to deal with the Zhang family on the night of the Ben Hai celebration. After some time, the night came, and it was time for Shin to pick up her daughter from the hospital. The protagonist's wife entered the room and brought a cake, asking how Rui was feeling. But to her horror, her daughter was not in the infirmary. The woman called for her daughter in despair, but there was no answer, and she was terrified at the idea that something had happened. The cake fell from her weakened hands. In the next second, Shin heard her daughter's voice. She forgot everything and ran to the girl, asking about her well-being. Rui didn't want to worry her mother and lied that her father had taken her out to play. Shin asked the girl not to play with strangers. The woman got nervous when her daughter said that Lin was taking her to play because Shin believed that her husband was at home all this time. Qing watched with emotion as the cake was discovered and noticed that Lin's wife valued her daughter's life above her own. Lin was nearby and admitted in an anguished voice that Shin was really a good mother. The protagonist was very distressed, saying that he owed her a lot. Then Lin reminded them that it was time to go because this time they were going to the Ben Hai banquet and had to get ready. In his last battle, the protagonist was ready to fight until his last breath for the peace of his family. Meanwhile, a man was sitting in a pool, drinking wine calmly. He turned to his subordinate and asked if it was true that the great Lin had awakened. The servant confirmed that such rumors were circulating, and also that one of the families had already been expelled by him. The Lord of the Dragons believed that this was just a show to display his importance, but in fact, his family had already lost its power. The subordinate was convinced that Lin was a threat to the emperor and suggested getting rid of him. The man got angry with the servant, and without leaving the pool, directed his energy towards him. The guy was thrown back, and the Dragon Lord said he didn't remember giving such an order. The servant fell down and insisted that it was dangerous for His Majesty to leave the God of War alive, but the Dragon Lord believed that Lin could be useful since he had a good reputation among the people. However, he considered that Lin should be put in his place. The subordinate heard the Dragon Lord's words and promised to solve everything. Then the Dragon Lord walked to the center of the pool and extended a hand that did not look human towards a spear. But the spear refused to obey, and red lightning began to appear along its entire length. The Dragon God was forced to let go of the spear because it rejected him. The lightning bolt from the spear severely wounded the man's hand. Suddenly, he said that since Lin was still alive, he needed to be visited. At that moment, eyes appeared in the man's unusual hand, and concentrated power began to appear in his palm. The emperor decided that since he could not use the artifact, he would simply destroy it. The lightning from the god's own spear lit up all around, accompanied by the mad laughter of the man. Meanwhile, in Lin's house, all the family members were living a normal life and spending the night calmly. Suddenly, Lin felt something strange and was surprised to realize that the Thunder God spear had been destroyed. Qing noticed the sudden and drastic change in the protagonist's face and asked what had happened. Lin asked about the spear. Qing replied that after the border war, she had heard that it was taken by the royal family, but the spear only recognized its owner, so it would definitely not be used by third parties. The protagonist replied that the spear had been destroyed a few minutes ago. The girl said that the Leshen spear was a divine weapon, and she didn't understand how it could be easily destroyed. The protagonist replied that this was a warning to him. Besides, he knew who could destroy the spear, and that person wouldn't miss the Ben Hai celebration. Then Lin sat in the wheelchair and promised Qing that he would reclaim what was taken from him. At this moment, a man dressed all in black appeared near Lin's house and quickly approached the windows. He noticed Lin's room and aimed, throwing a blade towards the protagonist. The window next to Lin broke, and something passed through at great speed. Qing realized that a hitman had visited them. Lin managed to lower his head and picked up the blade, remaining unharmed. The subordinate shouted to the main character that she was immediately going after the assassin. Lin carefully examined the dragon god dagger in his hands. Zhang and her mother were sitting in the living room when they heard some strange noises and tried to find out where they came from. Suddenly, the lights in the room went out, and the girl looked around in fear. Lin was extremely scared when he realized that there was more than one killer in the house. Jiang screamed when she saw the silhouette of a guy in the darkness right in front of her. The girl tried to find out from the stranger who he was and how he had entered the house, but the criminal remained silent. This man was wearing a mask and looked carefully at the girls, saying that they would pay with their lives for covering up for the wrong person. Then a small purple ball began to form in the criminal's hand, and he prepared to attack the girls. Li didn't want to die for no apparent reason and offered to give the man all the money they had. The boy in the mask invited the woman to take her money to the grave. Jiang hugged her mother, who was also trembling with fear. Several agonizing seconds passed until the girls noticed a man holding the criminal's hand. Lin condemned the guy's actions and slightly twisted his arm. The protagonist didn't understand why he had attacked defenseless girls. Lin was going to protect the Zhang family, even if he didn't like them very much. Then a blue lightning appeared in his hand. The criminal still had a free hand and concentrated his power in his fist. The men attacked each other at the same time, and each managed to block the other's blow. The mercenary laughed and prepared to attack again. The man had fun, thinking that Lin was weak. They continued fighting, and soon a knife appeared in the hand of the boy with the mask. Suddenly, the door of the house was about to open, and the bandit asked Lin if that was his family. At that moment, the man reacted instantly, and when Xin and her daughter entered the house, there was no one else there. Sine entered and saw the girls, terrified. Jiang asked if her sister had returned. Xin was surprised that they were sitting in the dark and went to the switch to turn on the light. When the room was lit, she saw the terrible consequences of the battle and asked, horrified, what had happened. While the mother was recovering, Jiang said that they had been attacked by a guy, but someone had managed to save them. Jiang added that the savior looked like that Mr. Lin who had shown up on Xin's birthday. Rui started running into the house, shouting that her father had saved the family. Her grandmother was disgusted to see this because she considered the protagonist to be trash. Meanwhile, the hero had dealt with the criminal and now returned to look at the golden dagger. Qing appeared at the window and regrettably reported that she had failed the task and the bandit had managed to escape. Lin said that this was not important now and asked her to look at the dagger in his hands. The subordinate recognized the dagger that the Dragon Lord awarded his servants. In addition, she added that the Ben Hai celebration had been moved to tomorrow night, which confirmed his hunches. Lin asked Qing to go to Wang and say that he must fetch Xin to ensure her safety. The protagonist understood that they were planning to try something against him at the Ben Hai celebration, after which Qing said goodbye and left. Oh, at that moment, the bedroom door opened with a roar, and the happy daughter ran into the hero. She was sure that it was her father who had saved her aunt and grandmother. Her father praised her for her intelligence. Lin took the girl in his arms and asked how she would react if her father wasn't exactly a hero. Rui smiled at her father and admitted that as long as he protected her and her mother, he would always be a hero. At that moment, Xin entered the room and then asked her daughter not to bother her father. She took Rui in her arms and agreed that they would let her father rest a little longer. Xin really wanted Lin to wake up. Suddenly she heard her cell phone ringing and answered. Lin's wife heard Wang's voice and asked what had happened. The man replied that the celebration had been brought forward and someone would pick her up tomorrow, but Xin replied that she no longer had an invitation. However, Wang assured her that the invitation was just a piece of cardboard and she was a respected guest. The girl replied that she was happy with the news and also apologized for the inconvenience. Then Xin stroked Rui's head and asked her to take care of Daddy tomorrow night. The daughter was happy to stay with her father and admitted that she was not afraid of anything by his side. After a day, the night of the Ben Hai celebration finally came. The huge territory was lavishly decorated. Li didn't understand why Xin looked so upset at this important event. In fact, Xin was worried about her family, especially after her house had been attacked. But her mother rudely replied that her scum of a husband was good for nothing, and now she must concentrate and find a man to marry. Suddenly, they turned their heads, and Xin saw her grandfather with Yan. Jiang held her mother and admitted that she was outraged by her cousin's behavior. Yan also noticed her relatives and asked how they had gotten here without an invitation. Jiang shouted that they were honored guests of Lord Wang, and he had personally brought them to the celebration. The guy next to Yan was surprised by Jiang's beauty, while Yan tried to put herself in a better light. The girl was amused, saying that she had the invitation and started to tell Zhang to go home. Lin's sister-in-law pointed to Yan and reminded her that this invitation belonged to her sister, so she had to return it. But Yan replied that only a worthy representative gets an invitation. The guy next door finally noticed the invitation and almost choked when he saw that it was purple and gold. These colors were the symbol of the imperial family, and this invitation confirmed the rumors that the Zhang family was close to the Wang family. Suddenly, another man appeared next to Yan and took the invitation, saying it was fake. The girl tried to take it back, but failed. The man noticed that her joy didn't last long. Yan was annoyed because a stranger was calling the genuine invitation fake. The old man ordered the girl to watch her tongue and introduced the respected gentleman named Joe. Yan immediately felt anxious when she realized that an influential person was now next to her, while a member of his family was trying to figure out why there was scum like the Zhang family at such a lavish celebration. After these words, the anxiety evaporated, and irritation and anger returned. But the grandfather stopped Yan. The old man bowed and apologized for his rudeness, and also said that the family was at their disposal. The man smiled when he heard these words from the head of the Jiang family. Then Zhou rejected the invitation and blamed the Zhang family members for beating Lu. He shouted that he had wanted to feel sorry for them, but now he was considering taking action regarding the situation with Lu. Yan didn't understand what he was talking about and explained that they hadn't done anything to Lu. The girl quickly looked at Xin and thought she had something to do with it. At that moment, Yan took Xin's hand and started accusing her of harming Lu for trying to win her over. Xin replied that it couldn't have been her because she didn't even know about the beating. Lu's father didn't believe the girl and ordered her not to pretend and to tell everything, otherwise the Zhang family would be forced to leave the city tomorrow. The fight was interrupted by the appearance of Wang. Behind him was the protagonist with his daughter and Qing. Wang would not tolerate those who started family quarrels in this place. Rui saw her mother and called out to her. The girl held her father's hand and waved happily to her mother, saying that her father had a surprise for her. Zhou looked at the new people with disdain and asked who they were. Lu's father replied that the disabled person in the wheelchair was Xin's husband, named Lin Feng, and the girl was their daughter. Zhou started laughing until he cried, saying that he didn't understand the point of this loser being here. The man's laughter was interrupted by Lin. The protagonist asked what more he could do. Xin looked at her husband and couldn't believe that he was really awake. Rui was next to her mother, and now she could show her proof that she was telling the truth. Zhou believed that waking Lin up was useless since he was in a wheelchair. The protagonist just snorted at this statement and stood up, releasing his sinister aura. Zhou was very surprised by what he saw and didn't wait long to say that he was going to break Lin's legs for what he did to Lu.